All right, so hi to this pretty poorly attended lecture, naturally, given that the assignment's due right now. I am basically going to run through the exam. In particular, like what is the structure of the exam, like what's in the exam, not literally, but like generally speaking. And we're just going to go have a look at some pages on Web CMS 3. So I'm just going to share my screen. One sec. It's being very sensitive. Cool. Okay, so you should be able to see my Chrome screen now. Basically, all the information that you need about the exam is sitting on the exam info page here. I'm just going to grab some water. So on the exam info page, I've tried to make this page contain pretty much everything people ask about the exam, and I'm going to spend about 20 minutes probably going through it all, so that we can look at all the details. So first thing is, for your exam, you are required to have access to the internet, which I know sounds like a bit of a novel thing, but what does this mean? Well, if the internet for you is a little bit unstable, right? Like maybe it cuts out sometimes, or maybe it's like super slow, then that itself is not going to be grounds for special consideration. If you fall into that category, then what you're probably going to do is to basically go sit the exam somewhere else. Find a family member, friend, university library, public library, anything like that, because kind of slow internet isn't really grounds for special consideration. What is grounds for special consideration, though, is unexpected and severe outages. So if you're at home, stable internet, all of that, and then something happens like your internet totally crashes and no one in your house can connect to the internet, you don't need to worry about that scenario, because you can apply for special consideration if that happens to you. Now, if that happens to you, though, you aren't granted special consideration just because you say your internet is out. You get it because typically you should email or live chat your internet service provider, Telstra, Optus, etc., and basically say, hi, I need confirmation from you in writing that there was an outage or service disruption in my area. And they'll typically provide it. This usually happens to someone every term. And then that's how you get the special consideration. So you don't need to worry about massive internet outages. That's totally fine. But what you do need to worry about is if you generally have like a little bit of unstable internet. So if you have this kind of unstable internet, then go do the exam somewhere else. Because if you just say, oh, I need to resit the exam, my internet was crap, it's like, I don't disbelieve you, it's just I can't take you at your word, right? So you don't want to put yourself or put me or us in that situation. By actually sitting the exam, by starting the exam, you are telling us that you feel well enough to complete the exam. And what that means is that if you have existing issues prior to the exam, they are not grounds for special consideration. So for example, if you are sick or you have the flu a day before the exam, or you've had some pretty severe surgery or some kind of accident, then you can't just try the exam and hope it's okay, and then halfway through be like, oh, actually, no, I still feel really crap. And then email me and be like, oh, there was this issue from a doctor's certificate I had yesterday. Can I sit the exam later? It's like, no, you can't, because you tried to sit the exam and therefore it's deemed that you said you were well enough. However, if issues come up during the exam, right, such as, if you're prone to migraines and you have a massive migraine, if there's like severe issues at home that you have to call the police or the ambulance or something, or anything like this that happens after you start the exam, then that is grounds for special consideration. And in that case, you stop the exam, you email me when it's safe to do so, if it's a emergency, letting me know that you're unwell. You go and submit a special consideration request and get the relevant medical paperwork. So for instance, if you have a severe, allergic reaction during the exam, or you suffer a migraine or something, you stop, email me when you get a chance. Go to the doctor, get a doctor's certificate, and submit that. Yeah, that's what's happening now. In terms of the actual date and time of the exam, we're doing a 4-hour exam. It's pretty late in the exam period. It's on the 11th of May, which I think is like in the second week. I think it's quite towards the end, second last day, third last day. The exam is between 1 p.m. and 5 p.m. So if you're in Australia, the Asia Pacific region, anywhere from India, China, through to Southeast Asia, Australia, New Zealand, anything like that, you sit the exam at that time, Sydney time. So if you're not in Australia and you're in part of Indo-Asia, you'll probably sit it earlier in your morning, like 9 a.m., something like that. If you're from Europe or the US, then you need to get in touch with me because Europe time, that's pretty darn early in the morning. I believe that's 5 a.m. In Western Europe, and in the US, that's like midnight. So we'll have to make some special arrangements for you if you're out of the country in another continent. Why is the exam 4 hours? It's not so we can ask you harder stuff. I write an exam as if I'm giving you a 3-hour exam. The main purpose of a 4-hour exam is to give you a little bit more time to breathe. It's to mean that if something bad happens to you, like your laptop crashes and you need a few minutes to restart it, that you have a whole extra hour as opposed to just normally 3 hours. So it takes the pressure off a little bit. So there's benefits to it, right? I mean, you're not going to complain for having extra time. The usual hesitation with a longer exam is that, you might think, oh, that sounds exhausting. And I think while that's like potentially true, if you do a 3-hour exam on campus where you're in like a lab under exam supervision and you can't talk, you can't eat, you can't stand up and walk around, I think that's quite tiring. Whereas at home, you can listen to music, you can, pat your dog, go for a quick walk, grab a snack out of the fridge. I think a 4-hour at-home exam is less demanding than a 3-hour in the lab exam. For those of you who've been at uni long enough to have actually ever been at uni. So that's the 4-hour exam, and there's the date, Tuesday, the 11th of May. In terms of the exam structure, the exam will be worth about 80 marks. That may change, that number, though it doesn't really matter because marks are just an arbitrary way of us slicing up your work, right? Like it could be out of 50, 60, 80, 100, 1,000. It doesn't really matter. Marks are arbitrary, but 80 is kind of the target. I'm still finalizing the exam. The exam's worth 25% of the course. The good thing for you is that for many of you, you will have passed the course. Like more than half of you will have passed the course before you start the exam. So that'll take a bit of the pressure off in terms of if you completely bomb the exam, then, at least you don't have to do the course again. So I hope that helps. And in terms of what we're actually assessing in the exam, 3/4 of it will be coding, like writing, like actually developing features and functionality, like in assignments 2 and 3. 15% of it will be making sure that your app is essentially mobile responsive, as in it works well in tablet size, mobile size, desktop size. And 10% of it will be usability and accessibility. So, are you showing the basics of good UI and UX principles, right? The exam, as I've said in the forum, will be pretty similar to assignment 3 in the sense that we'll be asking you to build a React.js app under exam conditions. The main differences, though, with assignment 3, like if I was to say to you, the exam is like assignment 3, the main differences are 1, the exam will be a lot less work than assignment 3. Assignment 3 is obviously a lot more work than the exam because the exam you have 4 hours. Number 2, you won't be assessed on linting and code design. We will pretty much not look at your source code at all. Why is that? I think when I was younger, I used to think coding under exam conditions was a bit like harsh because in the real world, you never have to code under exam conditions, which makes sense. Though I think the reality is that closed book nature of those types of exams is a lot worse than the trying to code under time pressure. And the reason I say that is because while a lot of your life you won't have to get things done quickly, there is a reality that a lot of the real world you face will consist of things where you have to get something important done that you should vaguely know how to do before the end of the day. You're not going to get it perfect. It's going to be a little bit hacky. You need to try your best. So the exam in some ways is trying to essentially test people's ability to loosely get stuff done under pressure. And that's why we don't look at your source code, because I don't think it would be fair to ask you to program quickly and to program neatly, right? So there's going to be no linter in the final exam, and we're not going to look at your code. The third thing is we're not going to have a backend. We're not going to give you a backend. This is because if we write a backend, there might be a problem with it, and we don't want that to happen. But also, it's just easier to work with. So, like, rather than having to worry about fetches and all this stuff, it's pretty much like no backend. It'll all be like front end based. And you can use your code. You're allowed to use your code from other assessments in the exam. So you can refer to your own code. You can refer to the exercise solutions. You can refer to all of that stuff. It's totally open book. Okay, what do you complete the exam on? We will distribute the exam via GitLab. So again, it'll just be like assignment 3. You'll get a repo called exam instead of assignment 2 or assignment 1. It'll be called repo. It won't be a group assignment. And you clone it and you work on it. And when you're done, you push it to GitLab. So if you work on VLab, you clone it to VLab. If you work on locally, you clone it locally, as long as you push it to VLab. So we will mark your code from VLab. That's the key thing here. The code we mark will be the master branch, like the latest master that exists. So as long as your master's up to date, you'll be fine. And I know we say ensure that your code works as expected in the VLab environment. That's true, but also, like, if you've been coding locally the entire course and we've been able to actually mark your assignment, then I don't think that's something you need to worry about. Basically, that's just a disclaimer from us to make sure people don't have some random environment that's super incompatible and the tutors can't mark it. If you do code locally, we can't guarantee help, and it's not always grounds for special consideration. So if you have some strange configuration error and it happens on VLab, we can help you because we're required to help you. If it happens locally, obviously we'll try to, but because there's a million variables that could affect your local machine, we might just have to say, well, sorry, but you'll have to try out VLab. Okay. This topic here is pretty important. So communication and help during the exam. So we said that the exam is an open book exam, and that means that you can use the internet and other resources to the full extent. The one thing about the open book exam, though, is that you are prohibited from essentially talking or seeking help from other students. So you should do the exam as if the internet's functioning. You can access any piece of information you want, but everyone on the planet is dead except for you and me, right? And the only person you can talk to for 4 hours is me via the forum and my email, but that's it. So no communication with other students. You can't talk about the exam. You can't talk about it with ex-students. We're not saying that you can't ask your parents for a cup of coffee or something. It's more like pretty much don't talk to anyone who has any association with computer science, the field, or there's a CSE student, or like you just can't seek external help. And I know you might think, oh, well, that's funny because my big brother's a senior engineer at Google. How are they ever going to tell that I didn't talk to them? And it's like, well, obviously we can't, but these things usually have a way of coming undone. Like a student scores full marks in the exam after tanking all of the assignments or doing poorly in the assignments. So we ask them to set us up, or, usually friends talk to friends and blah, blah, blah. So just don't do bad things. If you are in breach of any of these rules, you are subject to potentially getting a 0 for the final exam. It's always possible. If you have questions during the exam, you need to make a post on the Piazza forum. It needs to be a private post, not Piazza, on the Ed forum. So many of you have been doing this during the term. You go into Ed, you post a question. You do the same thing during the exam if you have questions. Don't email me. I'll be monitoring the forum, and make it a private post. So we don't want anyone posting publicly on the forum during the exam. Don't message me on MS Teams. Don't try and message me on Facebook. Don't message me on LinkedIn. Message me on the Ed forum. When you do post on the Ed forum, it's important that you're as descriptive as you can be. So if you have an issue, right, if you think there's a problem, then make sure your code's up to date on GitLab. Give us screenshots of the issue, explain to us how you produced it, and tell us how you're running it, basically, like in VLab or locally. You don't have to do that. But the problem is, if you don't do that, it's likely that when I get around to your message after 10 minutes, what I'm going to say to you is, can you give me more information? And then I'm going to start going through the other messages. Do you know what I mean? So like, it's in your interest to save time, to actually spend that tiny little bit of time to help describe the problem. Generally speaking, during the exam, there'll be two types of questions people post on the forum. One will be, this doesn't make sense, is there a problem? And we'll say no or yes, and we'll do a clarification. The other type of problem that might happen, are students saying, I got this horrible error, I can't pull from GitLab, GitLab's down, blah, 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 in which case we'll help you. You can't ask for help like, I don't know how to do this, I'm getting this React.js error, my code's not starting up. Like, essentially, the only times we'll help you are when we think it's not your fault that the problem's being caused, right? If we think it's your fault that the problem's being caused, then we'll basically say good luck. That's the point of the exam. So I'll just clarify here. Clarifications made during the exam will be made at the top of this page. That's not quite true. It'll be made in the exam spec repo. I'll have to update that little line there. That's totally fine. I'll show you the exam spec repo in a sec, so you'll actually be familiar with what I'm talking about. And we'll come back to that point. In terms of submission, I mentioned this before, we just take your master branch at the end of the exam. So once the 4 hours is up, we cut everyone's access, and whatever's on your master branch is what we'll be marking for your final exam. If you are an ELS student, or you have some other kind of consideration, I'll get in touch with you sometime between now and the start of the exam, and basically you'll have a different finishing time or a different starting time depending on your scenarios. We'll still take the master branch at the end of your exam time, but you'll have a different start and finish time. In terms of preparation for the exam, the best thing to do is to essentially review tutorials, exercises, and your assignments. You can be a little bit selective about that though, because for instance, there's no vanilla JavaScript in the exam. So like, you don't need to spend any time doing, document.getElementByID stuff or anything like that. There's extremely limited to do with promises in the exam, because we kind of pushed a lot of that on you during the assignments. But there'll be a lot of CSS, there'll be a lot of React components, there'll be a lot of general stuff. As I said, it's like assignment 3, but without a back end, less. And what was the other one? I already forgot. Yeah, we won't check your code. We have given you a sample exam paper so that you know what the real exam paper is going to look like. The real exam paper will be very, very, very similar. So what's happened here is that this sample exam, this is like what you'll get when your exam starts. Now, unlike the exercises and the assignment, this is not like one repo per student. This is one repo that everyone has. And we do that for simplicity. so that we can put the spec in one spot and we don't get confused about deploying new changes and merge requests and stuff. So the spec will just be on one page and it'll be clearly linked. As you can see in this spec, there's some instructions at the top. It's a link to the Web CMS3. I mean, I have to update a couple of these, but there's a link to the Web CMS3 exam page. There's a link to your personal exam repo. There's also a mistake there. I just noticed that won't be there when you watch this. But basically, the exam here in section 1 is like what the exam you'll have will be. It'll be like, here's a tiny bit of context. Here's how you get started. Like, you know, there's an exam repository. You run yarn install to install stuff. You run yarn start to start stuff. You can do the exam with vanilla JavaScript. It's just, it'll be harder. It's a short answer. So if for some reason you just skipped assignment 3 and you feel really comfortable with assignment 2, you might want to do it in vanilla JavaScript. But then section 1.2 here is all the features. So basically, there are tons of features that you have to implement. And this is the marking criteria. So when we go to mark your exam, we will literally go through these dot points, literally, and there'll be marks associated with them. And I'll add those marks again. By the time you're watching this recording, there'll be little marks next to these that I'll add in. They'll just be stubs. They'll all just say 1, even though they like might be different in the actual exam. Yeah, so how we mark the exam is we're like, go do this. And then to mark it, we open up your app and we look at this and we say, okay, does it have a footer that's no higher than 100 pixels? Tick. Does it have a footer that's always visible? Tick. Does the footer have big brain as a piece of text? Tick, like that. And we basically just go through all of these. Now, this is a condensed version of assignment 3 because I wanted to give you a sense of like kind of how simple this will be. Comparatively, and how much more like literal it is, right? Assignment 3 is a little bit more open-ended, whereas this is like this for this many marks, this for this many marks, etc. Your exam will be longer than this. It will probably be like at least twice as long. So this will give you a good sense of the structure, right? Because this course is so new, I don't really have the ability to I don't really have like the budget, I guess, to write a whole exam as a sample. And we're too young a course to kind of give you a whole exam as a previous exam as a sample because we don't have like tons to cycle through. But that's fine because your final exam will just be this, but more. Marking criteria is what we said before: submission, push your code to the master branch, originality of work, don't plagiarize, right? I'm just going to edit a couple of quick things here. Just checking. So I'm just going to very, very quickly. I'll do the rest of the edits later, but I just noticed that there are a couple of links that I forgot to update. I'll update that second one later because it's more complicated. Okay, so this is the actual spec. It's a repo with a README page. That's all that's in it. When you actually do the actual exam though, you're going to click on this link here, personal exam repository. And this will take you to that little page that exists where you type in your Z number and your Z pass, and it will take you to a page that looks like I can't do this because I'm not a student. Oops, sorry, exam sample. Like I don't have a GitLab repo for my stuff, so you'll have to it'll work for you. So when you click on this link, it'll load up this page for you. And then this exam sample is a repo that you all have, right? So there's one spec repo, and then there's 300 actual repos where you write your code. So the spec The spec is where you get the spec, and this repo is where you write your code. You can tell the difference because this one says exam spec sample and this one says exam sample. So for the final exam, we'll link you to exam spec, which will link you to a personal repo of exam. And that'll be like what you have to work with. So the exam sample is literally just a create React app that's been made. Like it's a completely empty repo where I've just gone and written npx create React app, and then we have a React app. That's all. So, I mean, you could delete that, whatever. The important thing though is that when you get marked, when the tutor marks you, we're gonna run like yarn start, yarn build. So if you do want to toy with it, just be aware we're going to be running the create React app scripts. But most of you are just going to basically run yarn install, yarn start, and get straight stuck into the source folder here. We will release this repo earlier than the start of the exam, just in case people want to like, do a yarn install or something. Like we'll probably release it like 10 minutes, half an hour before the exam. But the spec itself will be released at 1 p.m. Yeah. So next thing, in terms of these questions, as I said, your actual exam is likely to be a little bit longer, probably twice as long as this. This is just meant to be a bit of a sample. The exam questions they start off easy and they get harder. So you'll find it quite easy to start the exam, and then it will get progressively harder throughout. The conundrum that I've explained to students in previous terms of a course like this is that COMP6080 is an extremely practical course. And because of that, one of the issues we face is that we actually, like, the way we mark you is that we tell you to do something, and you should know what marks you've gotten when you leave this exam, because we tell you that your app has to have this, it has to have this, it has to have this, and all these things. And you'll either do it or you won't, right? There's like not a lot of gray area. Like either you make a footer that's less than 100 pixels, or you don't make a footer that's less than 100 pixels, etc. Right? Like it's quite binary. Because of that, there's like this kind of standard problem whereby if you finish the exam, if you do all the things that we ask you, you're probably going to get 100%. And this is quite different to, say, courses like, first year maths, where, you can finish the whole exam, but you get a bunch of it wrong because you had the wrong answer. There's less a notion of a wrong answer in this kind of exam, because we kind of tell you the answer. Like, here's what you have to do. Just do it. And visually you can see it. And it's so atomic, right? Like it's so easy to test. Right? It's not complicated. Like we're not running these auto markers with all these edge cases. It's just like, the footer needs to display the current system time in this format. It does it or it doesn't. So because of that, the problem is that by finishing the exam, it's nearly guaranteed that you get 100%, and therefore we need to make the exam longer. That's kind of the crux of it. So the design of the exam is such that you should generally know the marks you've gotten as you finish the exam, but our best student in the course should just finish the exam in 4 hours, or like just finish it in 4 hours. Yeah, and I raise that now because what will happen is people will do the exam and you'll get 2/3 of the way through, or 3/4 of the way through, or half the way through, and you'll feel really dejected because you're kind of used to different types of exams where you always finish it, even if you get like 65%. But this is a different type of exam, right? Because finishing a question, finishing a feature is getting the mark, basically. So we need to stop everyone getting 100%. So in general, your final exam, I would guess that half of you maybe will, I would say about the half of you will at least get half of it out, which I know sounds like a really random number, but more than half of you will get half of it out. But to do more than 80% of the exam, I think will be like 5 to 10% of students. It kind of ratchets it up a little bit. It's not like super hard at the end. It's more just like a little bit harder. It's probably more the time, and I think the way to manage your expectations for the exam, is that it's likely that you will come out of the exam not thinking, holy crap, that was so hard, I had no idea what to do. Like some of you at the very bottom end, of course, might, but it's more likely that a lot of you will come out of the exam and be like, oh, that was fine, I wish I had more time, right? Not I wish I knew more, or I wish I wasn't so dumb, or I wish it wasn't so hard. You'll come out being like, I wish I had more time. That's kind of the design of it, right? So don't fret. I don't know what the average mark for the exam last term was, but also don't worry if you find the exam is hard, because like if the marks are too low, we scale them up anyway. I don't think we'll need to scale them up. Last year the exam marks were pretty good, like, you know, 90% of people got like 50%, small percentage got above 90. So and that's my job. My job is to help both assess you and make sure that you are distinguished, so that if you work harder or you know more than some people, you're rewarded for that. And if you work less hard or know less than some people, you know, they're rewarded for that, or whatever that kind of relationship is. So yeah, that's pretty much it. On exam day, you'll get an exam spec just like this, which will link to a exam repo where you actually answer the questions. And your final exam will be of a very similar structure to this. It'll probably just be about twice as long. And I will give you some hints. In the final exam, I always like to make them about games. So if you want probably one of the best hints I could give you, hint is maybe not the right word. If you want one of the best pieces of advice I could give you about how to practice, if you go to tutorials and exercises and you go to exercises 4, if you go to exercises 4, you'll see that exercise 2 and exercise 4 is a React.js based game of the 2048 game. So if you haven't done your exercises, because I know there's a handful of people who haven't, you know, there was this game popularized in the last decade with all these numbers that you can slide around. This is a very kind of typical exam question. So what I'll be doing on the exam is basically asking you to make, you know, 3 little kind of games, if you will. And there'll be games. I mean, I don't want to say it's like it's 2048 because you can't really compare games, but it's more like I would practice this kind of question because I don't know if you can code this in React.js, and I'd say this is honestly a hard one, just to be clear. This would be a hard question on the exam, but if you can kind of code this and you feel comfortable with it, I think you'll find the exam somewhat manageable. Like it'll be a big leap forward. So, you know, assignment 3, some of these React questions, and I think you're well prepared. And again, just to recap, final exam will be like this, just longer. And oops, sorry, wrong one. Like this, just longer. And we're going to ask you to do just a few things with some different types of games. Be very simple. Like when I say simple, I mean it'll still feel like a chunk to do in the time we give you, but it's simple in terms of like, you know, it's not finicky stuff. Like we're not like, you know, there's all these different edge cases. We're kind of trying to get you just to get some stuff done. Anyway, that's all I had to share on the exam. Naturally, if you have more questions, because most of you are watching the recording, we can chat about it on the forum. Besides that, for those here, are there any questions before we wrap up? Was that helpful? Did you find that helpful? Was that informative? I don't know what other courses give you for exams. Is there any information you wish you had that you don't? Okay. that's good. Any other questions? Please post on the forum. Otherwise, you can check out the exam page on WebCMS3 for more information. So yeah, thank you. Hope have a great night. And if you're watching this later, I hope you're managing your time well during the exam period. So see you, everyone.